Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Saddleback webinar this week. I'm Liz Mangus, Literacy Specialist for Saddleback Educational Publishing. Welcome. I know for many of you across the country, it is spring break. So if you're here on your spring break, thank you. We really appreciate it. And for those of you who are not yet on spring break, don't worry, your time is coming soon, and we thank you for being here. As always, we like to start out with a reminder of where you can find your control bar and why that's important. So your control bar is at the bottom of your web browser window, and this is how you can chat with other attendees, ask questions, and turn on your subtitles. We now have the live transcript available for you that will show you subtitles as we present today. So if you'd like to take advantage of that, just click on that CC closed caption button and then choose Show Subtitles. When you want to chat with other attendees today, please make sure that you are choosing panelists and attendees from the dropdown. In Zoom webinar, the default is that your chat will go to only a handful of people, the panelists, unless you go in there and you switch that option to panelists and attendees. So just be aware of that as we are going throughout our information today. And of course, the Q&A area is where you can put any questions that you have either for Saddleback or for our presenter today. And we have with us today, Natalia Heckman of Saddleback Education. This is where you can find us on Twitter. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes with our content for the day. But in the meantime, we're going to say hello to Natalia and encourage you to go to Twitter and let everybody know that you are here and joining us today. So hello, Natalia, how are you?
Good afternoon.
And you are joining us from Houston today?
Yes, Houston, Texas.
All right, well, we are not too far from each other. I'm gonna check the chat and see who's here. Oh, Ms. Okraski is here today. Hi, Corrine, nice to see you. Tim is here joining us from Florida. We have Oregon in the house. Oh, and look at all of you showing off your skills, choosing panelists and attendees from the dropdown. You come to our webinar so often, you don't even need that announcement anymore. All right, welcome. Hi, Jody. Jody is here. Jody was presenting with us last week. If you haven't seen that, make sure you check that out. We've got North Carolina in the house, Connecticut, Ohio, New Jersey. All right, welcome everybody. Is anybody on spring break right now? We'll see. I think the people, oh, Jody's on spring break. Great. All right, Brenda, nice to see you. All right, oh, Yvonne Santiago, hi. That's Maynard ISD in the house. New Mexico. Oh, this is so fun. It's like my favorite part to see where everybody is joining us from. Grapevine, Texas. Also hashtag spring break. Yes, Shanna, I love it. Pittsburgh, Nebraska. Oh, Nebraska's on spring break too. I need a chart of all 50 states and I need to know who's on spring break when at one point in time. This will help me every March and April to know what to expect. And it's raining in New Jersey today. It should be starting to warm up there pretty soon. So, all right, well, it's just about time to officially get started. So our topic for today is scaffolding classic texts for secondary English learners. And specifically, Natalia is going to show us how she made this work in her classroom with Shakespeare. Now, I know a lot of us are required to teach Shakespeare and classic texts to our students. And if we have English learners in the class, it feels a little bit daunting, but there's a way to do it. We have to scaffold and we have to be deliberate and thoughtful in the way we teach. And Natalia has some great tips to share with us today. So if you do not know her, she, as I mentioned, she's in Texas and she started her career. She was trained in Russia as a technical writer and a translator. She never thought she was going to be a teacher, but she eventually landed in a classroom and she knew she had found her calling. So she has taught English and ESOL classes. She has been an ELA and social studies instructional coach, and she has been an ESL and bilingual program specialist. And now she works as a consultant with Saddleback Education. And this is a great session. I would really think you're going to love all of these practical strategies. So Natalia, welcome. Thank you for being here, and I will let you take it from here.
All right. Thank you, Liz, for such a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. I'm going to start my screen sharing, if you don't mind. Now, let me get my PowerPoint going so you could see my slides. Please let me know in the chat if you can see it. It should say my name and my company in the corner. It should say Natalia Heckman. Perfect.
Yes, we see it.
Worked. All right, we're good to go then. Welcome everyone. I'm so happy to be here and thank you for inviting me to participate. I'm glad that I can contribute. I work for Sidelets Education. My Twitter handle is @NataliaESL. If you have a Twitter account, I discovered Twitter not that long ago, and I just realized what are massive educational communities there, and people are constantly sharing resources. So I'm still in that honeymoon Twitter phase where I cannot, a day cannot go by without me checking my Twitter accounts or just to see what else is there. And I learn from other educators who are kind to share constantly. So there's something to consider if you don't have one yet. Now, I work for Sidelets Education, and I have to tell you guys that my heart is in a very happy place at work. My personal beliefs about education are in perfect alignment what our company stands for. And we work to support teachers of English learners of all levels, of all grade levels, and of all in all content areas. So if you're a secondary ELA teacher, if you're secondary ELA, if you have English learners in your classroom, you may be familiar with our resources. These are just a few. Some of our books there on the screen, but we provide trainings that accompany the resources that we share. So again, it's Sidelets Education. Now, today, I'm not here as a Sidelets consultant. I'm here as a former ESL, ESOL, English 2 teacher. I spend lots of my time in education at a public school in Houston, Texas. Now, I taught ESOL classes, which is English for speakers of other languages who are between year 0 and year 3 in the country. So they were not per se newcomers because they did spend a year in the language academy acquiring the basics. But some of my students were at the same time in the academy and they are working towards getting their English 2 credits. So they were in my ESOL class at the same time with me. So we had students of all proficiency levels, and we had the same learning objectives, content objectives as our regular classes. So I was never in a situation where I only had one prep or one class to teach. It was always general English and plus maybe ESL, general English or writing for English learners. So it was a combination of several preps that really gave me some of the tools that I felt that I could incorporate in my ESOL classes, that they were not just for my mainstream regular class students. So scaffolding, today we'll look at the scaffolding classics for secondary ELs. And I will use, I'll show you how I use these books in my classroom. Again, I'm not a consultant today. I'm just a teacher sharing what I did. And if you find it of any value, and if you find some of it, maybe some pieces of it, useful for your students, or maybe it will make your life easier as a teacher if you decide to incorporate it in your classroom. So with this, I want to make sure that I really share with you my perception or my perspective on teaching or reading in a classroom, in a general classroom, any English classroom. I'm a very strong believer in free voluntary reading. So when the students choose what they read, but at the same time, there's much to be said about teacher-selected texts. So I feel that there has to be a healthy balance, that balance between the student choice and the teacher-selected text. And my students were lucky to have both, really, because my classes were blocked. I had them for 2 periods, usually throughout the day. So my period 1 could be run as a reading or writing workshop. And in my classroom, I had a Read 180 library that I inherited from a teacher who was there before me. So I taught that Read 180 class for a while, but then the library stayed with me. And I think that library was really the heart of my classroom, and the kids had access to the books that they wanted to select to read as their free choice read. But then the second part of that block, I ran it as a whole text-based instruction, explicit instruction, the sequence that we followed that my district provided. So it was really a balance of both. In the Julius Caesar text that I will use as an example of the illustrated classics, it was something that we used as a whole text with ESOL classes. So this is just a little bit of a background there for you to let you know what my setup, because I don't know, as I share today, there's some strategies that can work for any class really, but some strategies are specific to that, in a way, self-contained model where I did have a whole class of English learners in my class, in my period. Now, I did have a little bit of hesitant, like I wasn't sure exactly if Shakespeare was appropriate for my students, but I really, it came to me in a way from something that the student said. My general kids who were reading, my mainstream students who were reading Shakespeare as a part of their curriculum, I remember one day they were leaving and they were picking up their books, and my ESOL students, so my English learners class, was coming in. So a kid saw the picture of Julius Caesar in the textbook, and he said, "Hey, miss, I know who that is. I learned about him in my school, in my country, in my home country. Why can't we read this? Why can we just read that story?" And I thought, oh my goodness, I was not set up. I was not prepared to teach it, because I thought that the text that we had in a regular English 2 textbook would be too heavy for my students. So I wasn't sure if it would work. But then at the same time, I remember that, some teachers were really passionate about teaching Shakespeare. I was really not sold on either way. But when I went to some of the conferences, at one conference, somebody was raving about these books. And my principal at the time was generously allowed me to check it out and try it. So we bought a set of 20 books. It had a teacher manual and it had an audio, still was a CD. Now everything I think is digital on the website, but I was excited to try something new, and it was spring and we wanted a whole class text, and that's not from the textbook. And I was just excited to try it. So that's how I landed with that resource, and with being, trying to do something that I thought would be great for my students to be exposed to. Now looking back, I actually started following some educators who are considering or who are going through the same thought process. And one of the educators I follow on Twitter, her name is Jasmine Lane, and she's not from Texas. She's from a different state. I can't remember. I think it was maybe Michigan, but I'm not sure. She has a blog and she writes about teaching ELA classes, supporting struggling learners. So I will constantly gain some new perspective from what she shares. It's just one of so many blogs that I read. But I found this quote that's on the screen, that's been on the screen for a while now. I found this quote in one of her blog posts, and I thought it resonated with me. She said that rather than back down from the challenging text and reading books that are engaging and relatable, immediately engaging and relatable, something that the kids would pick on their own, and that's something that they already know. It may be just something that directly appeals to them because of some interest they have, or prior knowledge that they have, schema. So instead of just going for that, why not try to expose students to something they may never pick on their own? So I feel in a way it expands our boundaries, and by providing that opportunity to get familiar with the classics. And again, it's through lots of embedded background knowledge and providing necessary supports that it will make those classics, it will make those books, those texts palatable for English learners. So I thought that was very appropriate. It affirmed me in my belief that it's something that is beneficial for English learners or for any student whatsoever. So today the question is not should or shouldn't I teach Shakespeare? It's your personal choice. And I think for some of us, it depends on the curriculum that your district follows. But for me, it was the question of how. So I want to share with you just a few strategies that developed throughout the years. And again, the first time I started, I just used whatever the teacher manual provided. But then as anything, you implement year after year, you make some changes, you make some adjustments. So I will share whatever I could remember that made my lessons fun for the students and made it enjoyable for me, because I think it's fun. It's important for us teachers to really enjoy the lessons that we share with our students. So why are classic texts difficult to access? And I think any teacher, you ask that question, anybody will say vocabulary, syntax. Of course, the sentences are not particularly written in the way that we're used to. And schema. Our students may miss some of the understanding of the schema that they need to access those texts. So as we go into the strategies, I will constantly go back to these three concepts, or these three fundamentals of breaking down the lesson into components and reinforce. So why am I doing it this way? Well, that's for vocabulary. Why I'm doing it this way. So that brings me back to the helping students with a sentence structure that may need, or how do I build schema? So that's a general blueprint in a way. Now we will also talk about engagement. I think that a lot of the success that your students will show or reading those classic texts, or reading Shakespeare in this instance, it depends on how much engagement is there. And I'm looking at the engagement. I recently wrote a blog post about it. I broke it down into several components, but for this one, I really want to look at the connections and access to language. Now, when I look at connections, I want to build the link between the reader and the character. So it's not just the connection to what I've learned. It's not the connection to what prior experiences I might have, because there may not be necessarily a lot of connections there. But I'm looking at the emotional link between the reader and the character. Can I connect? Can I relate? Can I build that? Can I feel that empathy for the characters that I'm presenting to my students in a way? And the second part is the access to language. I cannot be successful at something that I really do not know how to do. So looking at the language part of it and helping students to experience tiny bursts of success, where they say, oh, I can read it. Oh, I can respond to this question based on the text that I read by myself. Now, those successes are only possible if we provide access to language of the text that we're sharing. Now, two of these lead to that engagement piece. So when I look, and it's interesting that when I looked at the Google images, and I needed a picture for this to put on my slide, I said, oh my goodness, I want something that really represents what I think or what I believe about engagement. And this symbol came out, and it's perfect. It is the two-sided connection. It is emotional engagement. It's emotional investment in what I read. It's the relationship I develop with the characters as a reader. And it's also that cognitive engagement where I have enough language tools, or when I have enough scaffolding to be able to process the cognitive tasks that go into reading those difficult, rigorous texts. And going back to why am I doing this? I remember my conversation with my son, and I was just telling Liz earlier that he's a senior, and he's more of a math and science guy. And he told me, Mom, why do I have to take those AP classes? And I said, you really don't, but I wish you would, because you may be asked to read texts that you would have never chosen for yourself. So if you have this opportunity, and it's high school, you still have to do homework, you have to do things anyways. So do something. It's almost like sit-ups for your brain. You will benefit from it one way or another, but you'll enjoy it. And if it's I encourage him to take AP Lang and AP Lit, but I also put everything I do in my classroom through that mom's lens. And I say, do I want my students to take away that, or to have exposure to those texts, and to take away some of the concepts that even if I say, yes, I do, because I don't want the same for my son, so I want that for my students as well. So that's where this whole concept came from, and how the engagement piece really builds into what we will be looking at today. Now, I offer to you as for your consideration, this unit sequence that I used. And I'm going to go through like one at a time here. Usually what we do in our classrooms, we might spend a little bit of time on sharing information about the author, looking at some historical relevance. We read, we analyze, we do some work, and then at the end, we watch the movie. Well, I flipped it, and I'm so glad I did, because I started with the film. I did not show the entire movie because that's a long film, but I showed just enough where my film serves as a scaffold, where that watching this, which is a good movie, actually. It's a fun movie to watch. I didn't mind watching it for 7 years in a row every spring. So you watch it, it builds that, it builds familiarity in a way with the background. The kids get invested in the characters. And, you know, as a teacher, by the way, I don't consider myself an expert in Shakespeare. My bachelor's in literature, but it's not something that I'm passionate about. I consider myself a pretty strong fundamental literacy teacher, but I'm not a Shakespeare buff by any means. But if we look at so many dramas or historical dramas, histories, so very often we are thrown into the narrative midpoint. So for Shakespeare's audiences, they would have been familiar with the background story of what is going on, of the background historical relevance there. Our students are not. So that's 30 minutes investment of my time into building that through the film. It really, in a way, it worked for me. It worked as a time investment because it provided that scaffolding and building that schema and connections with my students. Now, looking at the relatively or historically relevant information, I always try to include some fun facts, because those fun facts is something we remember. So it's not just the map, it's something interesting that the kids can later on say, oh, I remember that day when you told us something, and then it comes as a fun fact. Now, from those two portions, from those two components, and it's not going to take an entire lesson here. I'm not going to spend 15 minutes on providing that historical relevance. It's very short. It's about 10 minutes, I would say 20 minutes at most there, to connect to the film, maybe to clarify some things that we saw in the film that we could discuss and say, this is historically true, this is correct, this may not be necessarily, that may be some imaginary or some fictional elements there. From that, I introduced graphic novels, and we read it. And the importance to me there, the important thing for me was that the students were the ones who were doing the reading, because the text was accessible to them and it was in the format that they are able to process with the language tools at that part that they already have in their language learning journey. Now, we did not leave out the original. There are some passage analysis that we all completed, or we all did, depending on where my students are. And usually for Julius Caesar, we did the what's it called, the argument schema analysis, and the funeral orations analysis. And I used the text of the tragedy. I used the original text there for that. So it's really built up. So it's built up to the engagement, or the engagement piece absolutely has to be there in order for me to hold my students' attention and interest and have them invested into that text, to the point where they are interested and where they are with me. I have them where we analyze that original, the text of the original, which is pretty heavy. And at the end, we have a movie party, which is usually after school because I don't have the time enough in the day to just, finish watching this film that we started. But it was something for us to look forward to. And it just gave us some opportunities just to get together after school, pop some popcorn, and finish the film we started. And this is what the unit looked like at a glance. So I will go into a little bit in details over the strategies that we used during this reading part, during the reading of the graphic novel. And this is the flow of the lesson that I used. Doesn't mean that you would have to necessarily follow it, but it's just something that worked for me. Now, lots of questions there. How do you decide, or why would you show the film first? Why not hold it till the last moment? And again, and I think that came up with in my conversation with my colleagues as well. I always ask them, would you rather read about this guy or this guy? Would you rather read about this Pompeii or that Pompeii? And the answer is, put yourself in the shoes of a teenager. And my girls would say, in my English 2 class would say, oh, this Julius is kind of cute. And I thought, yeah, absolutely. So we will carry it on. I want that investment. I want that curiosity. I want to spark. I want to have them engaged as they follow along with me through the pages of the original text, because we have so much already built in at that point. So as we show the film, as we use the visuals and share these fun facts, and it's just an example of one fun fact that I shared with my kids. I showed them the actual place where Caesar was stabbed, and I said, guys, look, that's what it looks like right now. But there's a cat sanctuary right next door. Isn't that how it's funny? Because we think it has to be, in a way, the way we think, oh, it's some sort of really somber atmosphere, or very, in a way, it's a museum type of setting, but it's not. It's, there are cats running everywhere. So there's something like that brings us back and saying these were real people. I don't want my characters to have that. I don't want my students to think they're statues, because we don't, we as humans, we have this built-in capacity for empathy, but we don't empathize with statues, and we don't empathize with something we don't understand. So I really worked at making those things real and tangible and concrete, so that engagement piece would be there as we read the text. And again, it is time investment, but as I found it, it's worth that time, because it makes us so much closer, brings us closer to the characters. Now, the second part of it, or the second side of the entire concept, is providing access to the language, because I cannot enjoy what I don't understand. So very often, if we are faced with a passage that we don't understand, or we can't access because there's just so many things that we cannot figure out, we don't comprehend, that enjoyment piece is not there. And I'm a strong believer that reading should be fun, and reading should not be a torture for students. Now, let's be very honest here. Like, for example, I don't have these books, and I didn't have them. And sometimes in my regular classes, I observe this process as a teacher. So when we ask students to read rigorous, heavy text, we may assign this reading. We may ask students to read at home, or we may ask students to read it on their own. Now, then when they come back and we realize that maybe 30% of them read, and maybe 10% really understood what was going on. And the rest of them said, Miss, I read it, but I really didn't get it. Can you just tell me what happened? And then we put the slides, the PowerPoint, and we tell them what happened in those parts, or we can go back and read it together. But who does the reading? and who does the listening? Are we really truly relying on that listening part that our students doing? Are they gathering the information? Are they receiving the information from truly reading the text, or is it listening? Because it's not the same. So if I press that play button on my audio file and I ask my students to follow in the book, the mental process that goes into that listening is very different from how we make sense from the text when we truly read it on our own. As an English learner, and I know it from my experience because very often I was in that situation. If a native speaker reads a text to you and you're trying to catch up and follow, forget about comprehension, because it's not enough time for me to slow down in the parts where I need to slow down and go back and reread and make connections and make meaning out of that text. That's totally different from me just listening, trying to catch up with the flow of the language. So that's why very often we have that file go, we have the audio file playing. We hope that students will follow in the books, and then their eyes are wandering, they're looking everywhere. And you would say, hey, would you follow in the book? And it's great for them to follow in the book. Maybe some of them, it reinforces that phonics recognition in a way, but yet they're not the ones doing the decoding. Even from that aspect, they are truly listening, and that's not reading. So for me, that was in a way, it took me for a while to figure that out. If I want my students to be good readers, they truly need time invested into reading independently and making sense of the text. Truly reading, not just listening to me telling them what happened in the story, or listening to the audio file and trying to follow in the book, because just way too fast for many of our English learners at native speakers reading pace. If we are using media to increase this comprehensible input, sometimes there are so many resources out there that might be a better choice. So for Shakespeare, even before I had those books, I used BBC Two series. They have really the video or the cartoon, the animated version of it. The captions are there, and it's very close to the original text, to the Shakespeare's text. So I can use this for targeted comprehensible input. If I'm looking at the text of the original, if I read it already with my students, maybe, and now I want to have that listening portion of it. I want them to hear it, to watch the video, to see the facial expressions of the characters there. I have an option of turning on the captions. I have an option of slowing it down, because there is a setting there where you can click on how fast the animated film plays. So there are other options for me there that work for my English learners. So there's it's a fun thing to learn, but it is in a way, I'm not going to show the entire animated film. I would only show maybe a portion of it that goes with the text that we are reading. And I'm very clear in my mind, this is reading and this is not what they're doing now. They're reading from the text somewhat, but it's really, honestly, that's not the independent reading that I would like for them to do. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I want the input, and input here it would be reading. So language input, if I'm listening to something, that is input. If I'm reading something, this is input. So I want that input to be comprehensible, because if the input is not comprehensible, I'm not learning. In that theory of the comprehensible input, or the best way for me to learn a language is when that input is slightly higher than where I am, where I'm comfortable. So if it's too easy, if I know all of these words, I'm really not learning much. If it has if the input is so high, so much higher than where I am, to the point where it's incomprehensible, it defeats the purpose, because it becomes torturous, it becomes incomprehensible, and I'm not learning from that either. So here, if I'm looking at the opening lines of Julius Caesar, as a native speaker and as a teacher, you see this. Now, as a English learner, as an English learner who is not proficient yet, I see this. And I just want to really to have this sink in, to be able to put us in to look at that from the perspective of an English learner. I want reading to be fun for my students. And this makes me irritated because I don't have enough comprehensible input to learn from that passage. I may don't even know enough vocabulary to use to rely on the context clues because I just don't have enough here. So if I look at this first sentence, wherefore rejoice, well, the whole thing would be gone because I don't know what wherefore is, and I don't know what rejoice is. So I can tell you that I truly rejoiced when I discovered Saddleback. And it's, in a way, to me, was a big help. So graphic novels, it was increased that comprehensible input and gave the opportunity for my students to truly read on their own. So the visuals are compelling. It increases that comprehensible input, and it's a time saver that I'm not bogged down into explaining the vocabulary because there's so many words, and I'm not pretending that my kids are going to figure it out from the context because they're probably not going to. They're still going to get to the most important point, key moment, and then you tell them what happened in the story. So this is more geared towards that independent reading piece where the students read and the students make sense, or the students make sense of the text. They're working on their comprehension.
Can I interrupt you here for a second, Natalia?
Yes,
because
ma'am.
we had a question come in earlier, and I was going to hold it until the end, but I think this is a good point to stop and pause. And the question is for any teacher who is on here who is looking at these adapted Shakespeare's and is looking at the graphic novel that Natalia is showing. Some of you are in situations where your administrators or your curriculum or just the expectations around you, they don't believe that these adapted texts are rigorous enough, that the only true way to hold high expectations and to hold rigor at the center of this instruction is to use the original. And the question that came in, Natalia, was how do I explain that, you know, this is not rigor necessarily for my students who have no idea what's going on? And I think the previous two slides where you blocked out, you know, this is what you see, but this is what the student sees. And as an English learner, this is irritating. Like, this is not rigor, this is irritating. This is incomprehensible input, right? So, and I believe you're getting to it a little bit in a few more slides, but this notion of using the graphic Shakespeare or these adapted texts, these are a scaffold. And Natalia already pointed out earlier as part of her unit sequence, there is passage analysis of the original that does occur. So I think to allay any concerns that people may have about, oh, I'm not allowed to use these sorts of adapted texts. The adapted texts are the scaffold that allows you an entry point into the original. So I just wanted to jump in there because there's only one question that came in, but I know she's not the only person thinking that. So I wanted to take that time to jump in and tackle that. So that's all. And if you had anything you wanted to add or speak to on that topic, I just thought I'd give you a chance to address that since that question came in.
Thank you, Liz. And if we may even go back to that at the end, because I think some of this will be answered when we get to the strategies and the resources. But if it doesn't, we can go back and reiterate some of it as well. But it makes perfect sense. We don't want our students to be put off or feel defeated when they're faced with this text, because we do understand that knowledge does not happen over time, does happen over time. You can't just, we're not throwing a student out to the wolves. We provide scaffolding, and this is a stepping stone. That's not our final destination. We are working our way towards the text of the original. So everything, we will work on some of the strategies that I hope will answer some of these questions there. All right. Okay. So, and this is right here. That's the slide where I think it just brings us to that strategies piece. So adapted texts, the graphic novels, they are a stepping stone. That's not where we want to be forever, but this is where our students may need to be to build that competence and confidence to later access the text of the original. Now, in giving that time to develop and giving the scaffolds, and this is a scaffold that makes our students, empowers our students for success later on. I want all of my students, and again, our English learners are not deficient in cognition. They are, if anything, they're enriching their language repertoire. They're building a second language, but they're capable of that meaningful engagement. They're fully equipped to answer these questions that you see on the screen right now. What character represents the theme of misguided patriotism? According to Brutus, does the end justify the means? Is Brutus a hero? Can my English learners answer those questions? Absolutely. I strongly believe that higher order thinking and higher order critical thinking questions are going to be a part of the curriculum, of any curriculum where we believe that our students are able to learn and they are able to complete any learning goals that are set out there for your mainstream and regular classroom. They just need the language tools to access that input that we provide. And to really, we need to help them with the output. What language tools do I need to answer these questions? So will I stop at that basic comprehension? And maybe that in a way answers that previous question, because I will get into literary analysis and I will get into thematic synthesis when I want my students to be able to look at the different texts and find similar themes, look at the text of look at the contemporary texts and compare it and contrast it with something that we read in Shakespeare. But I'm not jumping into this part before I build the basic comprehension, because how tragic would it be when I ask my students thematic or synthesis questions or literary analysis questions, and they have no idea what's going on in the story. And very often when the students are not able to answer these questions, it's not because they are not capable of higher order thinking. It's because they either shaky on that basic comprehension or they just need more language tools. So I'm going to scaffold and I will share some of the scaffolding strategies. So building literacy as a part of any lesson, as a part of this, as a part of the lessons that we build around these books. Now, I really would like for you to see that the growing language tools that our students are expanding constantly. Every day they're learning a little bit more and they're able to show you that understanding and able to use the language just a little bit better. But I want you to look at that literacy as a vine that grows and that threads through everything we do at every step in instruction. And then your students will blossom into independent readers, but we can jump from that first step into the highest possible, synthesis analysis question without gradually building that capacity, competence, and confidence in our students. So we will look at some vocabulary strategies, reading strategies here in a second. Word graffiti, partner reads, reading guides. Because but so is a writing strategy. We'll look at the summaries as page shrink, point and talk, word search, and close reading. The last two, that word search and close reading, they are a part of the teacher manual that comes with the books. So I'm not going to spend much time on it because it's self-explanatory. I think everyone is familiar with close reading. It's a fill in the blank exercise with a word bank where the students complete the sentences based on that word bank provided. But I will share all the other activities that I did with my kiddos that are not in the teacher manual. So, and I hope you'll find some of them useful. Now, the very first one is called word graffiti. I like the name of the strategy. I don't know where it came from, so please let me know if you know where the original, I guess, with the author of the strategy. I would love to cite it. But if you've ever been to the restaurant where you have a tablecloth and that you can write on it with those crayons, that's what it is. So in the very beginning of the unit, before we ever start with the books, you will need, or I used chart paper or butcher paper. And if you have the students in groups of 4, that thing needs to be big enough to cover all 4 desks. Think about it as their tablecloth. The students kept track of it. So they folded this paper in like a small size and they put it and they kept it in their box, in their period box. So every period had enough tablecloths for enough of those papers for them to write on. And I told them that, guys, we will keep this for at least 2 weeks while we are working with these books. So you make sure on the back you have the names of all the group members there written, and that you have your group number, because I don't want you to lose it. This is something you'll go back and you'll refer to it all the time. So before we have that tablecloth, every person has a section in a way. And so my section would be as big as my desk because it covers my entire desk. I'll put my book on top of this tablecloth and I will maybe set my pencil and pen, but this is space for me to write on. You know, it's a personal dictionary. That's what it is, and ultimately. But we work on this in phases. So before we read, for example, if I open this book right now on page 1, and I'm going to write when I start. So I'm going to look at the first page and I'm going to say, guys, I need you to scan the page for the words you don't know. Don't try to figure them out from the context. Don't try to guess what they mean. Just scan it. And it usually works best when you scan it from the bottom up. It takes that context away, so you don't try to like trick yourself. Oh, I know what this word means. No, you don't. You just guessed it from the context. So just look from the bottom up, scan, and on this paper, jot down or write down those 3-4 words that you don't know. Now, the students would record it on that paper. They can, as we read and as we go through that comprehension piece, they can translate it. They can use their L1, their first language, if they have peers that share the language. At this point, they can really expand their understanding of the word from the context and from several. Maybe we can have a discussion there that includes this word. So they hear it, they use it in a sentence. They go back to that paper that they use on the desk. And at this point, they can write a translation if they have to translate. Or they may even they may even write a phrase with that word from the book that helps them understand what the word means. Now, at the end of the lesson, and that was a very quick and easy, like 5 minutes, almost as an exit ticket, where you know, 5 minutes before the bell, you just have to clean up and you have to do something, gives you time to, you know, and just focus on something the students can do on their own before they all stampede out of your classroom. So choose one word from the words that you generated today and illustrate it. You can draw a picture, you can draw a stick figure. It's just a memory cue for you to go back to that word and just helps you remember the word. we can have a quick gallery walk. So walk around, look at the papers that other groups created. Do they have the same words? Do they have different words? You can even gallery walk over the same table as a group to see what your other members of the group did with the words. So that was word graffiti. And every time when we come back tomorrow, we just add 1, 2, couple of words. And we're not illustrating everything, because some of the words, kids realize that, oh, it was my new word for today, but it's so easy for me to remember. I don't need to draw a picture for it. But the other words may need a little bit more of reinforcement. So to make it very concrete, if I look at the very first sentence in that book, it says, "It was a holiday in the city of Rome, and crowds of people cheered the return of Julius Caesar, who had won a battle of Spain." From this sentence, what I've seen kids do, they're going to choose the word crowd, because not many kids would know that word. They would choose the word cheered. They would look at the word won, because they may know the word win, but they don't know the word won. So they would copy that one as well. Then they would say battle, and then they realize, oh, battle is a cognate. So I may not need it. I wrote it down, but I may put a check mark next to it, because I realized now that it's a cognate when we started reading. So it works as a personal dictionary that students add to gradually as we go through the pages of the book. And the vocabulary builds on. So maybe tomorrow they will still see the same words, but they're not copying the same word. They're only adding new words to their list. Now, partner read alouds it's a great way for me to really have students read aloud to each other. For this activity, I prefer kids to be of adjacent proficiency level. I do not want to partner up my beginner with my advanced, high, neonative, so a higher level student, because they might be bored with each other. I want students of adjacent levels here for this activity, because it empowers me to hear a student read. And maybe I don't want somebody who reads so fast that I cannot follow. I don't want somebody who is so low that I'm going to be impatient with. I do want students of adjacent levels here for this one. It's more comfortable. It's also a comfort question here. Now, it does not mean that I will not pair up students differently, but for this activity, it just helps to place students in those strategic partnerships when they read together and grow together. The book is set up as a comics book in a way. So we have some commentary in the blue boxes, and we also have dialogue bubbles in the yellow boxes. So the way I had it, I just said, if you partner A, you'll be reading blue boxes. Partner B will be reading the dialogue, the yellow boxes. You can flip-flop, you can switch, and then you can reread the page for fluency. So remember those graffiti word graffiti, you will see those words. It's not just one exposure. We go back through that read alouds, and you will hear the word as your partner reads, and then you read them. So that is, again, that reinforcement of the vocabulary. Now, point and talk is a great quick check for me as a teacher. And it is also a way for the students to clarify something they may not understood the first time around. So it could be a teacher-led, a teacher-initiated. And because the books have pictures, it works beautifully, and it's a time saver. So I'm going to say, okay, guys, can you please find the page where Brutus is being manipulated by the conspirators? They heard the word manipulated, conspirators. So I'm going to see, can they hear it first, understand it, or maybe I display it on the screen. This vocabulary, it's a higher level, it's a rigorous concept there, but I want to make sure that they are able to see, to match the plot to that concept, very quickly, we're going to find the page, point to that illustration or point to the sentence, point to the text evidence. I'm not asking them to maybe read it right away or write it, but I want you to point to the part or point to the dialogue that shows that Brutus is being manipulated, or point to the dialogue that shows, and that reinforces that text evidence that I will need later on when my students write those short answer responses, and they make an assertion and they support it with text evidence, but they know exactly where it is. So we work with that through the illustrations and through going back to the text. If you would like to have a teacher or student-led, we can set up students into those partnerships where one student would say, on this page I see, select any page, any panel. So the book is set up in panels, and sometimes it's different scenes. So select on this page I see, quickly retell your partner what happened in this part. So it's a summarizing strategy. It's that oracy, students talking to each other, that reinforces literacy. Now, if I look at connecting, everything we've done so far is for the most part oral. So if I want to connect the reading to writing, I do want to have a specific deliberate practice opportunity for my students at the sentence level and the paragraph level. And Liz, is there a question? I saw a question there. Is there anything that I want to address before I move on to the last part here?
No, I think we can tackle the rest of the questions at the end because I think you're almost done here. So we can just hold off.
Yes. All right. So if I go to the reading to writing connection, there are two ways that I did it. And I really, I'll tell you what I liked and what some of the ones that may work for you better. Summary or page shrink was a great way to reinforce literacy and have students write what they understood using the vocabulary that they've gathered through the reading. So we could either write a one-sentence summary, and there are different formats, different strategies for that, or we can work on the detailed summary. Detailed summary is more like a paragraph. So if you're doing it open book, it's still, the students know exactly what they're describing, but being able to write a summary is a great skill. And in my opinion, we don't practice it often enough in the secondary. Simply retelling what happened in this part of the tragedy succinctly, laconically, and just working on or targeting specific key plot elements. It's the skill that my students will need later on where they write literature analysis, because we always ask students to support their assertion with a paraphrase or support their assertion with a quick summary of the refer to the text. So if I'm asking my students to do that, I need to give them time to practice it. So again, it may take 10 minutes, and I'm going to ask my students, please look at the pages, page 9 through page 15. Tell me in your words what happened in the book. Or if I'm doing the closed book summary, all the words that we have on those tablecloths in the word graffiti section, they are available for your students to use, but they just have to put it in sentences. So they're writing a paragraph, they're writing a sentence summary. It's up to you. I do not give paragraph frames for this one. And if you follow me on Twitter, or if you know me from anything, you know that I love paragraph sentence stems and paragraph frames. For this one, I don't use it because I want to see what my students really know, are able to show me independently, because it comes after so much practice. We read it chorally, they read it with a partner. They may even, I may even show a little bit of that animated film. So the summary part comes at the end. And they are, at this point, they're building that literacy where they're able to write. Now, the second activity, and this is a very popular one, it comes from Judith Hockman's book, The Writing Revolution. It's targeting the sentence level skills. Now, it's called Because, But, So. And what it does, it forces us to look at an event or at something from different perspectives. And it's a sentence expansion opportunity for our students using the common conjunctions that we might have practiced. For example, here's a quick chance for us to make this interactive. So if you would like to complete the sentence in the chat, please do so. If you are not, it's okay. I'm going to show you what the completed version looks like. But I would provide a visual to my students, and I would provide a sentence as a complete, it's important that it's a complete sentence, because I'm either asking students to write a compound sentence or a complex sentence here with those conjunctions. So I'm going to start by saying something. Okay, please look at the visual. And this is a sentence starter here. Caesar trusted Brutus because. Can you think about the reason why Brutus trusted, or why Caesar trusted Brutus? Complete that sentence. Make sure it has subject and verb and ends with a period. Then we're going to come back maybe next day, or even if you're doing it station rotation style, I will provide the same sentence start. I'm going to say, okay, guys, Caesar trusted Brutus, but is there something that, what are some, maybe we're looking at contrasting concepts there, because that conjunction, how can we complete this sentence? Can you complete this sentence? And if it's a virtual teaching and learning virtual classroom, it's easy to check as a chat or a Jamboard. So here's some examples that we will see from the students as they complete this activity. And it's not going to be perfect. You may have other errors in the sentence, and that's okay, because we are growing literacy. I'm focusing on, I want to know, can my students express the relationship of coordination, subordination? Can they add a reason to the sentence? Can they make a compound sentence with but? Can they make a compound sentence with so? So I'm reinforcing the syntax while I'm working with the same concepts that we just read about. So I'm really very quickly connecting my reading to writing. Now, I've done it in Jamboard, and it's a fun thing. You can just set it up as the picture as a background, have students put the Post-its there. It's something that we can do with partners and groups, do a quick virtual classroom gallery walk. We have so much technology now to do that. And this brings us to the very last part of today. I don't even know how much time we spend at this now, but I want to share with you the resources that I created for my class back then, around 2012, I think. And if you find those useful, please use it. If you find any typos, they're my typos. If you find that you want to cut and paste or change something, please feel free to modify it. Now, I will share the reading guides that I created for these books with page numbers that refer to the page numbers of the novel, of the graphic novel. Now, they're also a quick project which we called memory squares, and 2 PowerPoints. So they used to be PowerPoints. I just uploaded into my Google Drive, and I'll share those as a slide as well. So the novel reading guide is set up as question answer with a reference to the page where the students can access the content, but it's also connected to the learning objectives or learning goals for English Language Arts classroom for ELA 2. So English Language Arts, that's a sophomore learning goals. So we're looking at foreshadowing, we're looking at tragic heroes, we're looking at aside. They're all the literary terms. So when we go into the literary analysis there, that's what this is for. but it creates a pathway for my students to follow as they read. Now, memory squares is a quick project that the students complete after we finish reading the book. It's set up as just pick a memorable quote, pick your character that you loved, and draw a picture, describe your character. Tell me why you like that character. Memorable event and one literary terms. So if you, it's not just about reading. You will notice that from those PowerPoints that I shared as in that folder, this one is all about literary analysis, but it's very granular in a way. I try to, when I work with the students, I try to keep those mini lessons down to 10 minutes. Today, we're going to look at motif. This is where you can find it. Let's read it. Let's connect it. Let's say that word motif many, many times so we know that it becomes a part of our language terms repertoire. So when the students go back and make those memory squares, we would have done this already. Now, for my original text lesson, and it was always focused around the rhetorical analysis of the funeral orations. So there's Mark Anthony and there's Brutus. Now you would have to have the original text. You'll notice the line numbered, but they are referencing to the text of the handouts that I used. So you might have to change the line numbering there. But notice again how the argument scheme is broken down into very small pieces. And it's explained. It would take, again, a couple of days, couple of lessons to go through that. Now, I believe that our students are 100% capable of literary analysis and of rhetorical analysis if we just take it one step at a time, let the literacy be that focus of the lesson, and bring us to the higher order critical thinking skills organically. I don't want to throw my kids to the wolves. I don't want them to hate reading, and I don't want them to hate Shakespeare. That's why I'm not going to just drop that original text without any scaffolds on them. Now, the best part of it all was the reader's theater. The kids had a choice. You can either recite the funeral orations. You could be playing Caesar. And when they realized that Caesar doesn't have any lines, that was probably the best part for somebody. Because if you choose to participate, you don't have to take the unit test. So you don't have to go back and answer questions about literary elements. And I always gave them a choice. Now, it was fun. I have to tell you, it was absolutely fun. I always kept those Halloween costumes, and kids love to dress up. And some years we wrote the script they wrote. However, Saddleback, I didn't know that till recently. They actually do have the books that are set up perfectly for readers' theater. And it would look like that. They're at different levels. So if you notice, this is Anthony's speech here, or the oration. And this is the same thing here, but it's from a slightly higher level. So there are several adaptations available. I did not have these books back when I was teaching, but they're there, and I look at them and they have lots of value. So if you have a student who may be not at the point where I want him to memorize the original text, which was surprisingly, I remember that my students were actually excited about looking at the text of the orations and memorizing those. So friends, country, or friends, Romans, countrymen, they remember that. Now, that was just there as a resource. And as I close, guys, I want to share with you this note that one of my students wrote. And I'm so surprised. I was telling Liz the other day that I'm so surprised that I still have it, that I had it in my with all the other school stuff that I put in my garage. But the students said that this story, and they wrote it at the end of the year. We read so many things besides Shakespeare, but he said that the story touched every student's heart. And it makes me think that, experiencing literature together brings us closer as human beings. And we don't have to share exact experiences, or we don't have to connect to the characters because we may look the same or gone through the same. It's just those human connections that we develop with the characters who are different from us. That's what makes this experience so valuable to me as a teacher. And that's all. And I'm not sure how much time's gone by, but it's probably more than 30 minutes.
Oh yeah, no, but that's okay. This is perfect. I think this information has been so well received. People are so excited about it. We have people who just got their first Saddleback graphic Shakespeare and are looking to implement it. And so they are very excited about these ideas. We do have a couple of questions. So we'll do one or two. But first, I always like to do this and make sure everybody knows what's coming up next week. Next week, we have Dr. McKnight back with us to talk about the inclusive literacy classroom and how to build it. We know a lot of our students are coming back to brick and mortar slowly right now, and then maybe eventually completely next year. So we need to make sure that our literacy classroom is inclusive and is deliberate and strategic in making sure that we're meeting everybody's needs. So we're going to begin that conversation with Dr. McKnight next week. You can register on our website or via email when you get the invitation email to register for that. Also, don't forget to check out our on-demand webinar on our YouTube channel around our new Saddleback digital platform. So if you need your high-low books digitally, we have those. And now let's get to some of these questions. Obviously, there was one burning question that popped up. Actually, I don't know that it was a burning question, but I really wanted to interrupt and get that out there because I just love how you so clearly explained how these materials are the scaffold, right? They're not the end destination, but they are an entry point. And I think that is a brilliant way to look at it. And I think it's very helpful for teachers who are trying to figure out how to work that in. So thank you for allowing me to interrupt you on that, Natalia. But we had a question earlier specifically about how you use the movie. So somebody wanted to know, are you chunking the movie and showing it in chunks as you're reading, or is it just that first 30 minutes or so at the beginning to kind of give kids like the backdrop of the time and place? So could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yes, ma'am. And I'm so glad you asked because it is important. The movie's long, and it does start with Caesar coming into power, and you can watch really the first part. I stopped and I did watch the first part with the kids. I stopped at the moment where the graphic novel picks up. So the moment Caesar returns after defeating Pompey, that's where the first lines, the opening lines of the tragedy. So I stopped watching because I wanted to read. While we read, we're not watching any film. We're not watching the film at all because I want them to be interested in what happened next and find out from the book. But then after we finish reading the book, we have a movie watching party and we watch the rest of the film. So, and while I'm reading this, I'm not watching the film.
Okay, thank you for that. And then we had a question come in a couple of weeks ago. We had a webinar around deaf education and language deprivation and deaf students as English learners. And this is not necessarily a question for you, Natalia, but Christine, I did want to acknowledge your question and kind of engage with you a little bit on that. The Saddleback materials and also the strategies that Natalia is presenting for making this material accessible to English learners. And definitely there's a difference with deaf students who are acquiring ASL and English at the same time. It's definitely not an identical situation, but I do think some of these strategies are usable and very helpful for English teachers who are working with students who are DHH. And then, yes, to answer your question, Christine said it looked like Natalia, your whole class was using these these books. And that is correct, because this was an ESOL 2 class. It was blocked and everybody had these books. And that may not be the situation that you're working with, Christine, as an interpreter. But yes, the resources could be used in a supplemental way to bolster the students' work in a regular English class. It would be dependent upon your students' reading level, because as Natalia mentioned, there are several adaptations of these texts, and they come in several different reading levels. So you would want to be sure to pick the one that is most suited to the reading level in English of the students that you have in your class. So I wanted to take a moment to answer that. And now at the end of when you have the move, oh, you said you did it after school. I was going to ask you, how did you do that in class? But you said you did it after school because it was so long. That's right. And then I think there was one more.
What with a substitute? If you have a substitute and you know your kids are not going to do anything, I'm just being real with you guys.
That's true.
You know, when you're not there, your kids are not doing the worksheets that you left for them, let them watch the movie.
Jackie had one question in here. Oh, Jackie, this was your question. Did you ever use translations during your instruction, or have your students read the classics in their home language?
There was one time where the student asked me if I knew if there was a link to the Spanish version of it, and there is. I just haven't thought about it, but thank you for bringing this to my attention. It's available in all languages. So not the Saddleback version, but the original version. So if the students are interested in pre-reading in their home language, this is such a wonderful moment to use that first language literacy to help them translanguage. However, even if the students are literate in their first language, the original translation of the original could be sometimes difficult because of the level of the language. Again, it would be a translation, it would be an original, unless you want them to read the summarized version, which is an option too. But I always have it student driven. I didn't assign it as homework. I did not ask them to pre-read it as in their home language. Only if they wanted to, it was there for them. And you can Google it easily. Like Julius Caesar in Russian. I read it in Russian back at home when I was in high school. Julius Caesar in Spanish. So you can find those online.
Thank you. And we are about out of time. I think if there are any other questions we didn't get to, you can email me. Let me put my email in the chat for everybody to see, because we are over our time today. So if anybody has a question you feel did not get answered to your satisfaction and we need to engage a little bit more, just go ahead and email me and we will get your questions answered. It's liz@sdlback.com. So thank you all for joining us today. Make sure you join us and like us and follow us on social media. And thank you for all you do, and we will see you next week. And thank you, Natalia. Take care, everybody.